I've always loved solo hiking. There's something about being completely alone in nature that clears my mind. No traffic, no people, just the sound of wind in the trees and the crunch of dirt beneath my boots. That's why I chose Glacier National Park for my latest trip. 5 days, no distractions. Just me, the mountains, and the silence. Or at least, I thought it would be silent. The first day was perfect. The air smelled crisp, like pine and damp earth. The only sounds were the distant rush of a waterfall and the occasional rustle of a squirrel darting through the underbrush. I hiked nearly 12 miles before setting up camp near a ridge overlooking a valley. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat by my fire, eating my freeze-dried meal and watching the stars blink to life. And then I heard it. A sound, faint but distinct. A soft, rhythmic clicking, like two stones tapping together. At first, I thought it was some kind of animal, maybe a deer stepping on branches or a bird pecking at bark. But the longer I listened, the more I realized it wasn't random. It was deliberate. I shrugged it off. Probably just my imagination playing tricks on me. But later that night, inside my tent, just as I was drifting off to sleep, it was back, right outside my tent. I held my breath, straining to listen. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, just the slow, steady click, click, click. I must have laid there for an hour staring at the thin fabric of my tent, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But eventually, the sound stopped, and somehow, I fell asleep. When I woke up, everything seemed normal. Sunlight filtered through the trees, and my little campsite looked untouched. But when I went to grab my food from my bear-proof container, it was open, not torn apart, not scattered, just unlatched, as if someone had carefully gone through it. There were no animal tracks, no sign of a struggle. Weird, right? Maybe I hadn't sealed it properly the night before. That's what I told myself anyway. I packed up and started hiking deeper into the wilderness. By midday, I came across something that made my stomach drop. An abandoned campsite. The tent was still standing, but it looked like no one had been there for a long time. A thin layer of dirt coated everything. There was a sleeping bag inside, unzipped, a half-buried backpack, a rusted cooking pot near the fire pit. And then I found the journal. It was small, leather-bound, half-covered in dirt. Most of the pages were ruined by rain, but I could still make out the last entry. It watches, it mimics. Don't look into its eyes. I felt a chill creep up my spine. I wanted to believe it was just some creepy joke, something someone had written to mess with future hikers. But that night, when I set up camp again, I knew better. I sat by my fire, forcing myself to stay calm. But the unease wouldn't leave me. I kept glancing into the trees, feeling watched. And then, click, click, click. The sound was back, closer this time. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the darkness. Nothing. But the second I turned off the light, click, click, click. It was right there. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I could hear something shifting outside my tent. And the worst part? In the dead of night, I heard my own voice whisper my name. I didn't waste any time packing up. I needed to get out of there. As I hiked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Every so often, I'd catch a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. A shadow, moving in sync with me. Not behind, not ahead, beside me. I broke into a run. The clicking sound was everywhere now, surrounding me. Click, click, click. The trees blurred past as I sprinted down the trail. And then I saw it. A figure, standing impossibly still in the middle of the path ahead. Tall, thin, no facial features. Just standing there, watching. My flashlight flickered. For half a second, the world went dark. And when the light returned, It was gone. I ran faster than I ever have in my life. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop until I saw the ranger station up ahead. I pounded on the door. It took a moment, but then a voice from inside. Familiar, too familiar. My voice, mimicked back at me. I don't even remember running to my car. All I know is that I didn't stop until I was miles away from that place. Only when I reached a gas station did I dare to look in the mirror. And that's when I saw it. Not my reflection. Not exactly. The face staring back at me smiled. And then, click, click, click. I don't know what I saw in those woods. I don't know what followed me out. All I know is this. If you ever hear something clicking in the trees, don't look. And whatever you do, don't let it mimic you. I've been camping in national parks for years. I know how the wilderness works. The rustling in the bushes, probably just a raccoon. The snapping branches at night, maybe a deer moving through the trees. If you let every little sound get to you, you'll never enjoy the outdoors. At least, that's what I used to believe. But after what happened in the Great Smoky Mountains last fall, I don't think I'll ever camp again. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip. Just me and my friend, Eric. 2 nights in the backcountry, far from the crowded trails. We wanted peace, solitude, a break from the noise of everyday life. We got exactly that. And something else. Something watching us. The hike in was perfect. Crisp air, golden autumn leaves, the distant sound of a river cutting through the valley. By late afternoon, we found a clearing just off the main trail, tucked between towering trees with plenty of space for our tent and a small fire. It felt safe. But as we started setting up camp, a thick fog rolled in. I'm not talking about a light mist. This was dense, so heavy we could barely see 10 feet in any direction. 1 second, the forest was bright and open. The next, it was like the world had disappeared behind a wall of gray. Eric joked about it, said it made the place feel eerie, like something out of a horror movie. I laughed, but deep down, something about it unsettled me. As the sun set, we sat by the fire, eating canned chili and passing a bottle of whiskey back and forth. The fog swallowed the light from the flames, making it feel like we were floating in an empty void. Then, just beyond the trees, something moved. At first I thought it was an animal, a shadow shifting in the mist. But then Eric nudged me, his voice low. "Dude, there's someone out there." I followed his gaze, and my stomach dropped. There was a shape in the fog, human-sized, standing completely still. I called out, no response. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. We tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe our minds were playing games with us. But neither of us really believed that. Later that night, Eric pulled out his trail cam, a motion-activated camera he had strapped to a tree earlier. He wanted to check if it had picked up anything. He scrolled through the images, flipping past normal shots of us setting up camp. Then he stopped. His face went pale. "Dude," he whispered, "look at this." I leaned in and felt my skin go cold. There, in the fog, just beyond our tent, were figures. At least 5 of them. Tall, motionless, just watching us. The timestamps showed they had been standing there for hours. I turned my head slowly, heart pounding, scanning the trees around us. Nothing. But that didn't mean they weren't still out there. We decided, right then and there, to leave at dawn. We crawled into the tent, zipped it shut, and lay there in total silence, listening. At some point, I must have drifted off, because I woke up to the sound of breathing. Right next to me. Deep. Slow. Too close. I froze, my mind racing. Eric was on the other side of the tent, dead asleep. Whatever I was hearing wasn't him. Then, from outside, a long, slow, dragging sound circling the tent. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay still, to breathe as quietly as possible. The fog had seeped into the tent, swirling in the dim glow of our dying flashlight. It felt wrong, heavy, like it was pressing against my skin. And then Eric jerked awake, gasping. Something had touched him. He scrambled for his knife, swung blindly, and hit something solid. A wet, gurgling hiss filled the tent, then silence. I didn't wait to find out what it was. "We need to go," I hissed, already shoving things into my pack. Eric didn't argue. We didn't even bother packing properly, just grabbed what we could and ran. The fog was so thick we could barely see where we were going. Every few steps I swore I heard footsteps behind us, not running, just following. We reached the car just as the first light of dawn crept over the mountains. I dared to look back one last time, and that's when I saw them. Dozens of glowing eyes, floating in the fog, watching us, not moving, not blinking, just staring. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking, and threw myself into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, and we tore out of there, gravel spraying behind us. We didn't stop driving for hours. When we finally got to a ranger station, we told them everything, showed them the trail cam pictures. But when they checked the camera, the images were gone, every single one, like they had never existed. The rangers just nodded, like they'd heard it all before. One of them, an older guy, sighed and said, "Next time, don't set up camp in the fog." We never went back, but sometimes, late at night, I wake up gasping for air because I swear I can still hear that breathing. And the worst part? I know, deep down, whatever was out there, it followed us home. I don't scare easily. I've spent years hiking, camping, and photographing wildlife in some of the most remote places you can imagine. I know the risks, the sudden weather changes, the predators, the fact that out there, no one is coming to save you if something goes wrong. But nothing I've ever faced prepared me for what happened in Yosemite last fall. I had been hiking for hours, following a familiar route near Mirror Lake, when I spotted something odd, a narrow, unmarked trail cutting through the trees. It wasn't on my map, no signs, no markers, just a thin dirt path winding deeper into the woods. Most people would ignore it. I didn't. I figured it was a forgotten route, maybe leading to a hidden waterfall or an old ranger cabin. My curiosity got the best of me. So I stepped off the main path and onto the trail that shouldn't have been there. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The air smelled crisp, damp from the recent rain. Sunlight filtered through the towering pines, dappling the ground in shifting patterns. I could hear the distant rush of a river. But after about 15 minutes, something changed. The forest got quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, no distant sound of squirrels darting through the underbrush. Just silence, thick and unnatural, like the whole world had stopped to listen. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Light, deliberate, following me. I stopped. So did they. I turned fast, camera in hand, ready to snap a picture. Maybe a deer had wandered onto the path behind me. But there was nothing. Just trees. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing moved. Shaking off the unease, I kept walking. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just my own footsteps echoing weirdly in the stillness. Then I saw it. An old wooden signpost, barely standing. The wood was cracked and gray with age, the lettering completely worn away. But that wasn't what made my stomach drop. It was the claw marks. Deep, jagged gouges torn into the wood, as if something with massive hands had gripped it and dragged its fingers down. I should have turned back. I should have listened to every instinct screaming at me to leave. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my compass just to make sure I wasn't getting turned around. The needle spun wildly, refusing to settle. My GPS completely glitched out. The screen showed my location as the middle of the ocean. That was the moment I decided I was done. I turned to head back, and my heart stopped. The trail was gone. I swear to you, it was just behind me. But now, there was nothing but trees. Thick, unbroken forest where a clear path should have been. I turned in circles, breath quickening. I had only walked in one direction. There was no way I had lost the trail, but it was just gone. Panic started creeping in. My breathing got shallow. I forced myself to move, to push forward, convinced that if I just kept walking, I'd find the trail again. But the deeper I went, the darker it got. Shadows stretched unnaturally long. The trees loomed closer, their trunks too straight, too tall, like silent watchers pressing in on me. Then, up ahead, something moved. A figure standing in the middle of the path. I froze. It took me a second to register what I was looking at, because the figure was me. Same jacket, same backpack, same stance. It raised a hand and waved. I stumbled back, my breath catching. My mind raced for explanations. Was it a mirage? A trick of the light? A hallucination from exhaustion? I squeezed my eyes shut, counted to 3, then opened them again. It was closer. I didn't hear it move, didn't see it take a step, but now it was only 20 feet away. Its hand was still raised, still waving. I turned to run and felt a hand clamp down on my shoulder, ice cold, too long, too many fingers. I screamed. Pure animal terror took over. I ripped free and ran, blindly, desperately, crashing through branches, stumbling over roots. I didn't care where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. The forest blurred around me. My lungs burned. My legs ached. Then, sunlight. I burst onto a main trail and collapsed to my knees, gasping. When I looked back, the trees were normal again. No figure, no endless shadows. I was back. I scrambled to check my camera, desperate for proof. My hands shook as I flipped through the photos, but my SD card was empty. Every single shot, gone. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure, and it didn't end there. A month later, I got an email from another hiker. He had found a camera deep in the woods near where I had been. It was mine, except I had never dropped it. And when I checked the photos, there was only one, a blurry image of my own face, taken from behind. I don't know what happened that day. I don't know who or what was on that trail with me, and I never will. But I do know one thing. Some paths weren't meant to be walked, and some things weren't meant to be found.